And discovering that about myself, and that was actually hurting me and putting me into depression, anxiety, because I was trying to hold up these ideals that were impossible to hold up as a mother with a baby and a toddler, was huge to starting to let go of all that stuff and realizing that I'm a whole worthy person, even if I'm not living up to those ideals that are they're not attainable. They're not realistic.
Ever feel like you suck at this job? Motherhood, I mean. Have too much anxiety and not enough patience? Too much yelling, not enough play? There's no manual, no village, and no guarantees. The stakes are high. We want so badly to get it right. But this is survival mode. We're just trying to make it to bedtime. So if you're full of mom guilt, your temper scares you, you feel like you're screwing everything up, and you're afraid to admit any of those things out loud, this podcast is for you. This is Failing Motherhood. I'm Danielle Bettman, and each week we'll chat with a mom ready to be real, sharing her insecurities, her fears, her failures, and her wins. We do not have it all figured out. That's not the goal. The goal is to remind you, you are the mom your kids need. They need what you have, you are good enough, and you're not alone. I hope you pop in earbuds, somehow sneak away, and get ready to hear some hope from the trenches. You belong here, friend. We're so glad you're here. Welcome to Failing Motherhood. My name is Danielle Bettman, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Sandra Etherington. Sandra is a mom to a 4-year-old and 7-year-old. She's the owner of Family Personalities and the co-host of Family Personalities Podcast, a fun and sometimes cheesy podcast that uses personality type to help change the way you see your family. With a background in mathematics and Big Four accounting, Sandra uses her talent for analysis and data, combined with her training and passion for Myers-Briggs personality type, to help families work together more effectively to raise their uniquely wired children to be the best versions of themselves that they can be. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to learn more from you today. So just by that intro alone, it could appear that you're a mom who has it all together. Have you ever felt like you were failing motherhood?
Oh my gosh, every day. Does that count?
Yes, absolutely. You're part of the club then. What has that looked like for you?
Yeah, when I think back, probably the biggest point in my motherhood journey where I really felt like I was failing was after my daughter was born. So I had my son. He was about 2.5 when she was born. And a couple months into, my intro into babyhood and toddlerhood combined, I developed postpartum depression. And it was really difficult for anyone who's been through that. Like a mental health struggle while you're trying to take care of 2 little ones is really hard. Mm-hmm. And I took it as something's wrong with me, right? Like all these other mothers, they're doing this just fine. But me, I have crawled down into a deep, dark hole. Like, why is that? What's wrong with me that I can't hack it like everyone else can? Mm. And that was a huge feeling of failure that I had to work with alongside trying to recover from postpartum depression.
Yeah. And life never stops.
No, it does not stop, especially when you've got 2 kids.
Yeah. So how did you grow? What did you learn? What resources did you have?
Yeah, I mean, mental health journey aside, which I, worked with doctors and therapists and all that, that feeling of failure, which I still get, and because my mental health struggle is ongoing. I'm much better than I was, 5 years ago, but it's still a constant struggle, and I've learned a lot of things that I need to put into place. And every time that I sink lower again, and I feel like that pull of the depression or the anxiety, I start to feel that feeling of failure again. And for me, there's a lot of things that have helped, but one thing in particular, as long as we're talking about personality types today, mm-hmm. is the Enneagram personality type model. If anyone's ever heard of it, it's not the type model that I work with, but I do talk about it a lot on the podcast. it's the personality type model that's denoted by 9 numbers. So you're a 1 or you're a 2 or you're a 3 or whatever. I'm a type 1, which is like your stereotypical perfectionist. And that's not something that I realized about myself early on. I never identified as a perfectionist. I'm not someone like, if you look at my workspace right now, I thought of someone as perfectionist as like having everything orderly all the time and neat, and they always looked perfect on the outside. And that's not me. I don't identify with that form of perfectionism, but I have like these ideals in my life that if I'm not holding up to them, I'm very, very hard on myself about it. And discovering that about myself, and that was actually hurting me and putting me into depression, anxiety, because I was trying to hold up these ideals that were impossible to hold up as a mother with a baby and a toddler, was huge to starting to let go of all that stuff and realizing that I'm a whole worthy person, even if I'm not living up to those ideals that are not, they're not attainable. They're not realistic. And so I did a lot of personality type work around, where did this come from? Why do I feel this way? How can I let it go? And that's been really, really helpful to me to constantly work on that. And it's brought down my depression and anxiety. And especially in times like this with COVID, with our kids home all the time, learning to let go of those ideals has been really helpful for me.
Oh, I'm sure we can all relate in some way, even if that's not our personality, because so much of motherhood is ideals and appearances and opportunities that we feel like we need to live up to, and they're not attainable. Like out of the get-go, they're just not. And we all deal with that in different ways of how we kind of cope through that reality. But what has that looked like for you? What has been kind of like one of those coping mechanisms or strategies or things that help?
A lot of self-talk for me. I have a critical inner voice, which a lot of Enneagram ones will report having, where it's like, you're not doing this good enough. You didn't meet this goal. Like, what, something's wrong with you that you're not meeting these outside goals. So for me, it's self-talk. Like every time I feel that voice creeping in, I talk back to it and I say, I'm trying to think of like one of my ideals, like the being on time or whatever, which with 2 small kids is really hard to be on time, right? So when I'm running late and I feel that anxiety gripping me and you can't even get out the door on time, it's talking back to that. Nothing bad is going to happen if you're late. It's okay to be late, and just like talking back. And I found that talking back to that inner critic, it's been huge for me.
Hey friends, Danielle here. I'm so excited to be able to offer you a way to get the help that you so desperately need, like so many of our guests have. I'm a big fan of therapy. As a mom, it's a must-have. Your mental health has a direct effect on your child's mental health. You can't give them what you don't have, and asking for help is a sign of strength. But it's intimidating. I get it, and you have to find childcare, and with COVID, who can even venture out these days? Well, have you heard of BetterHelp? They're a new sponsor of this podcast, and they are here to help. It's not a crisis line, it's not self-help, it's professional counseling done securely online. BetterHelp will assess your needs through a questionnaire and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. Their counselors are legit. Licensed, trained, experienced, and accredited psychologists, marriage and family therapists, clinical social workers, or licensed professional counselors. And BetterHelp is committed to helping you find a good match, so they make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. It's accessible for clients worldwide, and financial aid is available. As a special offer for Failing Motherhood listeners, you get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/wholeheartedly. That's betterhelp.com/wholeheartedly to get the help you need today. Your kids need you whole. Okay, back to the show. I'm never on time. So there's that. I am a pretty hard 7 with some 3 tendencies. I do find a lot of my worth through accomplishing, but ultimately the message of a 7 of wanting to feel taken care of and just not wanting to be like trapped by anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like I need to have full control of everything and be able to move from one thing to the next. I hate scary movies or anything that makes me feel sad or bad. So I get really weighed down by like even just the overall vibe of the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with right now we're recording when there's lots of protests and things. It's hard for me to sit with those feelings. So that's my personality, which is, you know, different from the perfectionist personality. But we all have, you know, the pros and cons and struggles of our personality. So that leads into probably a lot of why you have dove into this work. So when you were going through, you know, needing to find help, was this something that you had already been doing, or did it get you into it?
Personality type, the Myers-Briggs model, which is the type that I work with families, I actually was introduced to it when I was in the corporate world, and they use it a lot in the corporate world for working better as a team, understanding your teammates, and the people who work for you or with you, and how to work with them better and communicate with them better. And when I discovered my Myers-Briggs personality type, it was like this huge eye-opening thing. Like it made me look at myself in a whole new way that I had never considered. And I remember when I was reading the description for the first time, like being like, oh my gosh, how does this like description on a website know me better than I know myself? Like, this is crazy. And so I just like dove in, like, what is it about Myers-Briggs that really gets to the core of who you are? And I was so fascinated by it. And so I did a lot of work understanding people in my family and myself and, you know, my significant other who became my husband. And when my children were born, I just naturally was like, hey, do they have a personality type yet? Like, when does that develop? And who are they? And how can I understand them in relation to myself? And what do they need based on that? And so that kind of became that natural questioning that I had. And I looked into that and then eventually wanted to become trained in it and be able to use it to help other people.
Oh, I love that. Which is still something new that lots of grown-ups are realizing, that there even are these, you know, personality tests, and that they can be really valuable in that self-identity, because then we can really set ourselves up for success and give ourselves grace when we need to. So the idea of translating that to your child is definitely a new thought and idea. What have you learned in, like, when does personality develop?
Yeah, so with the Myers-Briggs model, it's believed that that is set from birth. It's a preference. It's preferences that you come into the world with, and your brain is firing in a certain way that causes you to express your personality type in that way, and it stays the same through your life. That being said, there's way more to you than your Myers-Briggs personality type, right? So I'm not saying like your kid is who they are and they're never going to change. Like we all grow and develop and change based on our experiences and our own self-work and all that kind of stuff. But these naturally wired preferences, those stay the same, and they are just you when you come out. But when can you see it? That's a little more of a hazy question. I can tell you that with my own children, I had a guess as to what each of their types was by the time they were 2, and it hasn't changed now that they're 4 and 7.
Interesting.
It's the same type that I had guessed, and I feel 99% certain that those are their types. I am not going to label them officially as those types until they are old enough to understand the model themselves and choose that type for themselves. And so with families, I will work with kids who are, if they're 7 or older, they can participate in the typing process themselves, which is really fun. And if they're younger than that, we can take a best guess as to their type. And you can learn a lot based on that best guess, but it's not 100% labeled until they have had the chance to reflect and choose that type for themselves.
So I've never done the Myers-Briggs. How does it compare to the Enneagram, or what are the different components?
Yeah, so Enneagram I'll start there because I know a lot more people are familiar with Enneagram than Myers-Briggs. Enneagram is like the defense mechanism that you walk through life with, basically. It's like, and there's actually this great author called Pat Wyman. She has an incredible book that it's more like a textbook. It's not a good place to start with this, but she talks about Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and how they're related. And she says Myers-Briggs is your house. That's your home. That's your naturally most comfortable self. And then Enneagram is the guard in front of that house. That's who you put up to feel safe and protected in the world. And if you can remove that, then you can look deeper into how was I wired and what's my most natural way of being. And so that's what Myers-Briggs is. It's kind of your natural preferences. You can think of it almost as right-handed or left-handed. Like one day you picked up a pen with your right hand and that was your hand and that was your preference, from birth. And with the Myers-Briggs preferences, it's the same thing. So Myers-Briggs is denoted by 4 different letters, and each one stands for a different part of the preference pair. So for example, the first one, you're either I or E, introverted or extroverted. And we'll get into the fact that there's a lot of ambiverts out there. In fact, we all are actually ambiverts, but you have a natural preference for one or the other. The second letter is N or S, which stands for either intuition or sensing. The third letter is T or F, which stands for thinking or feeling. And the last one is J or P, which stands for judging or perceiving. And once you discover your preference for each of those, then you know your type in Myers-Briggs.
Okay. Interesting. So do you recommend parents do this work first and then, start to discover what their kids are and then how they, interact with each other? And so what does that look like for how you work with families?
I like to do it sort of at the same time. So usually I'll start with a typing session with the parents. And then we move to the kids so that you have like a base understanding of the model, and then you can apply it. And then, it's a little bit different when you're looking at behaviors in kids and what their type might be than it is in adults. But at least you have that base understanding of what does a preference pair mean? How do I pick between them? I feel like I'm both. But there's a lot of intricacies to it. And so we work through that, and then we work through it with the kids. And then all together, I bring, here are your, say you're a family of 4. Here are your 4 personality types. Here are how they are related. Here are how they are different. And it's really helpful to understand your child in relation to yourself, because I don't know, we're all self-focused, you know what I mean? And so having to be able to compare that similarity or that difference is really helpful.
Yeah. So I could see how just knowing your child's personality would be fine, but if you don't know how it interacts with yours, then you're not able to really use that as a tool going forward.
Yeah. I mean, you can use it, and there's still some tips that you can take from that. I have some, families who they're not ready to invest in understanding the entire family's personality. So they'll start with one kid that they're having an especially hard time connecting to or motivating for things. And that's okay to start from that. But if you understand your own personality type also, it just can give you a lot better perspective.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the major advantages of understanding your family's personalities?
That it helps with communication a lot. Understanding how your child needs to hear directions from you or hear criticism from you can be just really helpful. And then it can help with having a better compassion for them too. So, a lot of times you see a behavior in your child and it feels like they are doing this to push my buttons, or they are doing this to be an a-hole.
Yes.
And this
That's how
can really, it does feel like that sometimes, even as someone who has done lots of work in this, and I totally understand what's behind that behavior. I still sometimes am like, you're just doing this to make me angry. It can really feel like that. Mm-hmm. And this can help give you a why behind those things. Why are they doing that? And we even have a segment in the podcast that we call why do they do that? It's your why do they do that moment of the week. And we analyze that, what about their personality types make them do things in this way that can be so aggravating.
Yeah. Well, I know when I work with families doing parent coaching, a lot of it is helping them just understand developmentally appropriate behavior and development as a whole, so that they can understand what is normal for a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, and how do I step in, or do I need to step in? And what does a healthy boundary look like? And, how do I make sure that I'm showing up as the parent I want to be in those moments so that I can diffuse a situation or help, them cope with their big emotions. And we talk about a lot of these big picture things, but I think what you do is like a really powerful supplemental next level to be able to say, okay, now that you may know everything and have a really clear picture of what you're doing and what your role is, how do you zero into the child that's right in front of you and their differences and uniqueness? And I really feel like when a parent is an expert on their child, then they can be a really, really effective parent. Mm-hmm. How have you seen that pay off just for your family?
I mean, my kids are, if you look at from a Myers-Briggs perspective, they are opposite in almost every way, except for one. They both prefer introversion. And so it's really interesting to see how differently they react to the same exact things, right? And any parent who has 2 kids or more has had this experience of like, the second one comes out and you do everything the same as you did with the first one, and yet they react totally differently, and none of your systems that you had in place for the first one work with the second one, right?
Yes.
So it's really helped me to understand. And my daughter is pretty different from myself. They're both pretty different from myself, but but I had these strategies that work for my son that I can relate to because they would have worked for me too, that just don't work with my daughter. Like charts work really well for my son. Like, he had like a potty chart, when he was learning how to go potty, and he loved it. He loved being like going and putting the little stickers on the chart and then earning something at the end of the chart. That sort of thing works really well for him. For my daughter, no, she can't do that like future thinking, that future payoff. She's so in the moment. And that's her P, the perceiving. And so things like that just don't work for her. And so I have to think about it totally differently. And coming up with those in the moment, exciting things, making things fun for her in the moment is so much more important than the future incentive that works so well for my son.
Interesting. So would you consider your daughter more of like the quote unquote strong-willed personality that like a lot of people have heard that word and, it has lots of interpretations?
My son is definitely the more strong-willed one.
Is he?
The other thing about children or adults who have a preference for judging, that's the J in the Myers-Briggs, is that we really know how to stick to things. So that can be great when you have something that you need to work on and really stick to and put your whole self into, and so it can really serve you in life. But when it also means when you don't want to do something that your parents want to do, you really stick to that too. So he's definitely strong-willed in that way. My daughter is strong-willed in the way that she is not externally focused. She's much more march to the beat of her own drum. And so, like I said, like those external incentives don't seem to work. It's strong-willed, but in a different way. I actually talked about this on the most recent episode of the podcast about how every child is strong-willed, but in a completely different way.
Oh, yeah.
Or every child is stubborn is the word we use, but in a completely different way from one another. And I would say my son is the more classically stubborn kid, but my daughter has her own stubbornness.
And where do the big emotions come in? Is there a letter for kids that just have like super high highs and super low lows?
Yeah. That was our most recent topic. We covered the thinking and feeling preference in kids. And those with the feeling preference, they're really tuned into the emotional state of themselves or of others around them. And that's, if you have a classically sensitive child, say, or dramatic might be a word that people use also, your child might be a feeler rather than a thinker. And that is really useful to know and to understand on a deeper level. And it's actually, the preferences all work together, so they're not standalone, right? So if you're an F on the Myers-Briggs, say, instead of a T. You're not the same as someone else who's an F. So say like my type is INFJ. My co-host type is INFP. And because we have that one letter difference, that actually changes everything else. And we both use our feeling in different ways. And understanding that can be so helpful to understanding what's going on in your kid's head when they have those big emotions. So the way that my daughter, as an FP, she's an ISFP, responds to emotional situations than I do as an INFJ is very different. And so I've had to understand that, like, I was a very emotional child too, and I cried a lot and I had a lot of big emotions, but hers are different from mine. And being able to understand the difference in those was really key to helping de-escalate situations and care for her emotional health.
Yeah, I can see how that totally probably makes you feel at least a little bit more like you know what you're doing as a parent.
Yes. Yes.
Because they don't come with manuals. You know, it may be more of a training brochure booklet to read up on them.
Yes, it is. It can give you a little bit of a better roadmap to understanding your child and what they need and how you can help them and guide them.
Hey, it's Danielle. Did you know that I offer virtual parent coaching consultations? If you feel like you've tried every parenting strategy under the sun and none of them are working, and if you and your partner are not on the same page in those heated moments, and if you can't seem to get it together and stay calm like you want to, you are not alone. Who knew parenting was going to be this hard? As your parent coach, I help you figure out what's really going on, problem solve new strategies, and help you feel like you know what you're doing. Find more information at my website, parentingwholeheartedly.com. As a new client and podcast listener, enter the promo code PODCAST for $25 off your consultation. I can't wait to work with you. Yeah, wow, that's powerful. I'm excited to have found your work, and I don't know anyone else doing something like you do, but I think I'm a big proponent of we need all the help we can get when it comes to parenting, because
that's for sure.
We don't come into this having it all figured out. You know, motherhood doesn't just come naturally. It really is a lot of work, but it's also a journey of us learning alongside our kids. Mm-hmm. So the more that we can be vulnerable in that journey of saying, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to learn. And here's, one way that I'm going to do that. It's not only going to benefit us and our mental health, but it's going to benefit our kids hugely, because the biggest, most powerful thing that we can do for our kids is help them feel more understood.
Yeah.
And this could be a really cool tool to do that tangibly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an incredibly powerful tool. I'm really passionate about bringing it out to the world because it's not something that's often done. Even the training that I went through wasn't even specifically for in the family setting. It was for in the school setting. So there's not a lot of, it's new. It's very new. I only have known 2 other people who are doing or have done what I'm doing. I'm sure there's others, but as far as like searching far and wide, that was all I could find so far. So
well, good for you.
It's new. I think it's really interesting. I think it's really powerful, and I want to get the word out there and bring it to the world.
Yeah. I love that. So what advice do you have for moms of either your personality type specifically, or just what do you feel like are the biggest things that you hope moms can learn from your experience and your story?
Yeah, I think the biggest learning thing with personality type is understanding that your kids aren't you. And so they need very different things than you needed as a child. Because I think a lot of times we can come into parenting as either this is the way my parents parented, so this is the way I'm going to parent. That's one approach. Another approach, which is the approach that I took, was here's all the things I felt my parents did wrong with me. And so I'm going to correct that and parent the way I wish I was parented.
Yes.
Which is another approach. And this is a whole new approach. It's how is my child uniquely wired? What are their unique needs that might be very different from the needs that you had as a child, or might be very different from the way your parents parented? And how can I serve that?
Yeah. Which is like next level conscious parenting. You know, like you really have to be humble enough to realize there is no one size fits all parenting best practice, which is frustrating. And there's so much conflicting information on the internet that would make us feel like we are not doing it right. But if we just get to know our own kids and how they are different from each other and different from us, I think we're able to come to a lot better conclusions about what would be quote unquote best for your family.
And I think it can be fun too. You know, it's not all about, I need to make sure I'm doing this the exact right way, which is like my tendency as an Enneagram 1. But I think it's fun to learn more about your kids. And we try and make it really fun in the podcast with the different segments we do. And, you know, just commiserating about all the difficulties of parenting. It's just fun to get a little more insight into your kid, to understand why they do what they do. And even with my kids, you know, they're starting to have a little understanding of this because I talk about it with them, especially my son, and he'll say things to me to make fun of my personality type, and I'll say things to him, and you know, it can be fun and casual too.
Yeah. So one more question I have on that specifically is, if I were playing devil's advocate, does it put kids in a box or have like a label that then determines too much about who they are and how you interact with them? What is like the aspects of who they are that are beyond Myers-Briggs?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because the last thing we want to do is stifle our children, right? Or like say, you know, you're ISTJ, and these are the only careers that you can do because that's who you are. And it's nothing like that at all. If you really are using personality type in the correct way, it's to understand more of what you need as a person, how to communicate with one another, and it's not to limit what you can do in life. Like I said, with the introversion, extroversion, we all do both. We have to do both. We can't function as a human unless you can interact with other people in the world, but you can also go inside yourself and be reflective and have quiet moments. And every Myers-Briggs type is capable of doing all of the things. It's just that we have a preference for one or the other. So understanding that with your kids too, that they can develop their other side and that they can do that just as well as someone else. It's just that they have a preference for one or the other, and they're going to be more happy and healthy if they can use that preference in their life. So like, really easy example with introversion, extroversion. If you have a child who prefers introversion, doesn't mean they can't go out and be a performer, give presentations, be social. I am actually someone who prefers introversion, but I am incredibly social. And I did musical theater growing up, and I did speech and debate. But I need a lot of time alone to recharge if I'm going to be a mentally healthy person because of that preference for introversion. And understanding about that about your kid, you can put them in lots of activities and then take them back, make sure they have plenty of quiet time, you know, say before they have to start their homework or whatever else, and giving them more of what they need can help them be more healthy. So it's not about boxing your child in or restricting what they can do in life. It's about understanding them so they have more of what they need.
That's a really great differentiation to help really wrap our minds around this, I guess.
Yeah.
So how can moms connect with you and find out more?
So my website, www.familypersonalities.com, is a great way to learn more, to set up a free intro consult if you want to talk about how I can help your family. The podcast is excellent. We'll probably, by the time this releases, the entire first season will be out there so you can binge it. It's called Family Personalities. It's on any podcast app or network except for Pandora for some reason. I can't seem to get it on Pandora, but it's on everything else. And then on Instagram, it's actually a great place to follow me. My handle is Family Personalities, and I post a lot of different fun personality type stuff. There's interaction in the comments, like, oh, one of my kids is like this, one of my other kids is like this. And that's a fun way to dip your toe in if you're not ready to commit to anything.
Nice. And you had a special for our listeners?
Yeah, you know what? I think it was 15%. I was going to do 15% off for anyone who's a listener to Danielle's podcast. If you mention it in the comments when you book a free intro consult, then I'll apply that to any typing session. And, usually I like to work with the whole family, but I am right now offering individual type consults because I know right now is a especially difficult time for families, especially financially and otherwise. So
awesome. Thank you. I might have to take you up on that. So the last question that I love to ask every guest is, how are you the mom that your kids need?
How am I the mom that my kids need? Oh. Gosh, I am incredibly, as an INFJ, one of our superpowers is our ability to feel compassion and empathy for others. And so my ability to really sit with my children in whatever big emotions they're going through, I think is incredibly powerful for both of them.
Oh, I love that. Because we definitely don't all have that superpower. But your kids are lucky to have you. Thank you so much for all the advice and perspective and your time today. I really hope that we're able to dive into this even more. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Danielle.
You are the expert of your littles. No one's going to know them like you. And the more we know ourselves, the better we can parent. Get the help you need if you need it. Next episode, we'll hear from Ariana Bradford, whose book, Shame on You, is coming out July 7th. She's brutally honest, and it's so needed. If you're loving this podcast, leave a rating or review, and join our version of Patreon, where you can support the show and join our exclusive community. You belong here. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. I believe in you, and I'm cheering you on.